The following programming is sponsored by Marc J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group. Entrepreneur, founder, author, and financial advisor Marc Bernstein helps high-performing business owners turn their visions into reality. Through his innovative work and the Forward Focus Forums, Marc connects entrepreneurs to resources that fuel their success. Founders Forum is a radio show and podcast where entrepreneurs share their journeys, revealing the lessons they've learned and the stories behind their success. Join Marc and his guests for a mix of inspiration, valuable insights, and a little fun. Now, let's dive in.
Good morning, America. How are you? Good morning, Arlo. I always say good morning to Arlo. Sometimes I shouldn't say always. It's not a sunny day in Philadelphia, so it's not always sunny in Philadelphia. That's confirmed now. But it is a nice day. It's a beautiful day. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of noise, a lot of static, all kinds of crap going on. But this is a choice to think and to go a little deeper and to hear people's views and how they've created themselves. And I consider it a unique opportunity. I consider today a unique opportunity because I have a 25-year plus friend of mine on who we don't get to see each other as much. We were neighbors, now we're not, but we always have great conversations. So I know this is going to be another great one. And I have a topic of the day, and my guest name is Malcolm, Coach Malcolm, and I'm going to involve him in this conversation, which is something I've been thinking about. All of us have different domains that we operate in our lives. You know, there's the domain of business, which is a lot of what this show's about. There's the personal domain, which could include family, your personal, mental, and physical health are both domains. Your spirituality is a domain. Your social environment and community is a domain. So there's all these different domains that we operate in. And I've been looking at this for many, many years. And when I do planning, and when I do, I look at, I kind of organize it by, here are my family goals and concerns, here are my business concerns, here are my financial concerns, here are my spiritual concerns, and things I want to work on throughout the year when I build an annual plan. So what I've noticed over the years is that doing this is like whack-a-mole, because there's always something popping up that needs attention. And it's like, okay, now we're going to address this. The question is, and I work with a group of people, and we've been discussing this issue, is when one pops up, let's say it's physical, let's say you have an illness, and you pretty much have to put all your attention on that. How do you work in that domain, and at the same time have it try not to impact the others? How do you separate those in a way that you can keep operating on? If you're not operating on 5 or 6 cylinders, maybe you're operating on 4 or 5 now. So Malcolm, I know you probably have some thoughts about that.
That's a pretty deep question to just throw at a guy at 10 o'clock in the morning. But,
in all fairness, I did give you notice.
Yeah, you did. 5 minutes notice. But I think as you were describing it, different domains, and how do you not allow one domain to distract or impact in a negative way other domains at a certain time or whatever. I think the first way through it for me, or how I would look at it, is that you try not to compartmentalize your life too much, first of all. And in terms of domains, the first thing that popped into my head when you mentioned it was, for me, there's what you might call a primary domain, or the playing field on which all the other domains are existing. And that primary domain is always impacting the other domains in a positive way, right? So when, an illness pops up, you're looking at that particular domain through the lens or filter of your primary domain.
And what is the primary domain?
Well, for me, it's a spiritual domain.
I knew you'd
everything.
say that. Yeah.
Everything is viewed and interpreted through, my spirituality.
Yep.
So in that way, I'm always in the same place. It's just, I'm focusing on different things through that same lens or whatever.
So you still might have the whack-a-mole, but you're looking at it all through the same lens, and you have that as a base from which to operate, which is a strength, I would.
And to a certain extent, all those things look similar, in a way, because you're looking at them through. So if the lens was green, then all those individual things are different green things or whatever, I guess, if that makes any sense. But that's kind of the way that it, immediately impacted me when you said it. It's like, well, in my life, the business, the family, the relationship, all that stuff, it either is happening or not happening through that lens, right? You and I, we've been friends for a long time. I would argue, I could be totally wrong, but, it was always a sort of a spiritual thing, an undertone. And if that wasn't there, we would
in our relationship.
In our relationship.
Yeah, I would
right?
agree. Yeah.
And I would argue that if that weren't there, for me at least, we would not have really been friends.
Right.
This long.
Right.
Because if it doesn't really, if it can't rest on that foundation, then to me, it really is not going to have value.
I agree. Listen, I love that answer, and we could talk about this for 2 hours easily.
You know it.
but we're not going to, because so let's continue later in the day or later in the week. But great answer, and I love that, and it gives me food for thought in terms of how actually it is something I've been thinking a lot about in that regard. So it's great. So now let me introduce you to Coach Malcolm, whose name is Coach Malcolm Hairston, and he is CEO of Raku Products LLC, an inventor of the Hipsetter, which is really something different than everyone's different on this show, which is great, but it's really something different that we'll have an opportunity to talk about soon. And he is a lifetime entrepreneur, having owned several successful businesses. As a matter of fact, I met him on the corner, I'll never forget, of the block where we lived, waiting at the bus stop and finding out about his 2 current entrepreneurial activities. And I'm like, oh, this is an interesting guy. But these include property inspections for large insurance carriers, which I think he was kind of just getting into at that time, custom cabinetry, granite and marble, and I knew him through those generations, music production, which is really what got us talking, and he was sort of coming out of that at the time, and athletic coaching at the age group, high school, and college levels, which he's had a lot of success in, and we could have a whole show probably just on that. So very interesting, what I call Renaissance man individual, and welcome, Malcolm. So happy to have you here today.
Glad to be here, Marc.
So let's talk about how you started as an entrepreneur, your first endeavor. And then I'm also interested in finding out, like, what is it in your bones that makes you an entrepreneur? But let's start with where you started.
I guess for me, I really only ever worked for someone immediately out of college for a very short period of time. And
what was that? Because I'm not even aware
that was out of college as a football player.
Right.
In Kansas City. And
I should have added. He played in the NFL. That's a whole other story.
For a minute,
right.
But that was really the only where I can say, I was, drawing a check from,
You were employed. Yep.
Immediately after that, I was a musician, and I, went to work in a band, a full-time musician. And after that, it was...
And you still are a musician, just not, it's not your profession.
Just don't play anything. And then after that, it was music production. And then after that, it was, it just one thing after another, after another, after another. So for me, it's always been an entrepreneurial, endeavor with my life.
I might add that Malcolm had a successful career in that. When I met him, he had recently produced for Patti LaBelle as an example, and other people, but
yeah,
he had a nice level of success in that. So,
yeah, I tend to get into things and throw myself into it 100%, throw my creativity into it 100%, and some things work really well, some things, don't work at all. And, but for me, it's all just an expression of creativity. Music is an expression of creativity. Coaching hurdles is an expression of my creativity. Inventing Hipsetter is an expression of my creativity. It's all the same thing to me. And again, I think that goes back to that field that I exist on and all my different, compartmentalized things are resting on. So to me, it just all feels like the same thing. It would be hard for somebody to say, for somebody to maybe understand that literally for me to make a piece of furniture feels like making a song, or feels like coaching an athlete to, run over a hurdle better. It's all a creative endeavor resting on the same thing,
I agree. I was thinking about that. Someone from the outside, I completely understand it because I know you, and I'm built somewhat that way myself. It's a joke because if you saw us side by side, you'd never believe it, but we used to say we're twin sons of different mothers. Both left-handed bass players, I have to imagine, right, too, that learned to play backwards and all that. So we have a lot in common that way. But, it would be hard for other people to understand that, and I get that. So you went, when we met, you were transitioning from the music business to the inspection business. And I know you had kind of a different experience with that, so let's talk about that. And it was successful. I know it was financially successful. But
it was very successful. To date, my most successful venture. Me and my wife, as I was in the middle of really starting to have some of my best success as a music producer, I've always been the type person that sort of like had like a second thing going on just in case kind of thing. And so I was always sort of like doing this little inspections work for another person. And at a certain point, he wanted to get out of it and wanted to sell the business. And, my wife and I said, hey, that's something to, maybe buy or whatever. It wasn't going to require any of my time, really. And so we bought it, and really, I was working at it, somewhat, but, she was primarily the one that was sort of like managing it. And then as I was transitioning out of music, then, I threw myself into that. And we grew it into a really successful business over a, 20-year period.
Yeah, that was pretty much like the span of our being neighbors. That 20-year period, pretty much. Yeah. So... And what I didn't realize or sort of pre-interview, I knew Kim was involved in the business, and I knew she did the stuff you didn't like to do, like the management, administration. But when we were talking before, it was really like she was more kind of driven and passionate about it in a way than you were, from what you told me.
Because for me, it was an expression, and it was a way to make money, but it wasn't like the best way to be creative. Not really, because it was doing work for, insurance companies.
Right.
Those are not the most...
wasn't inspiring.
And those aren't the organizations that really, would value the type of creativity that, I need in my life. I need to be making something.
So you just explained that puzzle to me, because I always wondered about that, because what it seemed like that wasn't consistent with the way you are on all the other endeavors that I was familiar with.
Yeah, that was a way to make money.
Right.
And,
which is important.
Which is absolutely important. Right. And, she was way more passionate about it always than me. But I played my role in it because there was, I had the expertise in that field,
right,
because I had been doing it for many, many years before we bought the business. But, in terms of...
So it's kind of like if you weren't married and she wanted to start a business, she would hire a guy like you that had the expertise and, be like the key person, but it's her business kind of thing.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
So I never
and,
saw that.
when solutions needed to be found or addressed or whatever, that's creative. So, for me, I would find that to be interesting. But, that really wasn't my cup of tea.
This is actually a great place to take a break, have a quick commercial. We're going to hear about your latest business, and I want to talk to you a little bit about your challenges as an entrepreneur that you might have had and the strengths that you developed, and then we're going to move into the new business and talk about that.
Great.
Think you know gait and posture correction? Think again. It's time to question everything you ever believed about improving your posture and movement. People everywhere are discovering a revolutionary new device called Hipsetter. It's simple, faster, more intuitive, and the results? Permanent. Traditional methods can't compare. This is the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Ready to transform how you move and feel? Learn more at hipsetterwpc.com/walk.
We are back on Founders Forum with our guest today, Coach Malcolm, and my good friend, and delightful to have him here today with me. And I'm going to introduce the new business. Before that, I want to ask you about one of the things we talk about on the show is that being an entrepreneur is always a smooth ride, right? You start and it's just...
Yeah, right.
I knew you were going to say that. So we'll talk about the kind of challenge. Let's use that because you're 20 years in the inspection business, insurance inspections. What kind of challenges did you and Kim and the business have? And how did you meet those challenges? And what kind of strengths did you develop in your entrepreneurialism through the learning there?
I think my honest answer is it wasn't very challenging, at least from my point of view. Right. I would say if we look back on it, Kim and I now, it wasn't really that challenging. You just had to go out and do a job that they needed done, right?
But you didn't do all the inspections yourself. You had employees as an example.
we had lots of employees. We spanned from Virginia all the way up to Maine. And literally doing, thousands of inspections for these large companies. Now, I won't mention their names, but, thousands of them a month. So, dealing with people and managing people who all were pretty much remote, except for the staff in our office or whatever, that was challenging more so near the end. For a long period of time, that wasn't really a challenge because the bottom line is if you found a certain type of person that they would pretty much run themselves. And so it wasn't really a lot of managing to be done or anything like that. It only really got challenging as the companies that we worked for made the job harder. They because for whatever reasons they would, bring about new changes. And
I was going to lead you there if you didn't bring that up because I knew that because we talked about it.
Yeah.
Dealing with big insurance companies can be a challenge.
Yeah,
contracts and changing the deal and all that kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, being what I would call unscrupulous. And I exist on a spiritual foundation where you shouldn't be unscrupulous.
Right.
So once I realized that I'm with an entity that is like that,
try teaching that to large corporate America.
Yeah, right. But again, like I said, if you and I hadn't had some seed of spiritual connection, we wouldn't have been friends this long.
Right.
Well, in that environment, it was a period of time where the people that I primarily worked with at the insurance companies, there was a connection there, and there was a mind meld or whatever you want to call it, where we were on the same page and we thought we were headed for the same direction. But as time went on, they got pushed out, and new people came in with different mindsets.
The corporate culture of your contractors, really, they were changes, and that was the challenge. Yeah.
Majorly. And, as it became more and more, as they became less interested in having someone working for them that provided value other than a lower price, then, it just became more and more and more challenging.
It became a commodity, and that's all they really cared about.
That's all they really cared about. And again, I was just always, my time is valuable to me. And if it's not valuable to you, then, the only thing I'm getting out of this is money, and that's not enough for me,
So I on some level, I knew that. So the question is, how did you meet that challenge? Because you obviously didn't continue at you didn't stop the day it started. So how did you deal with that? And what was the ultimate? It's a good place to talk about when you reached the end of it and decided to exit the business.
I don't know that I ever met that challenge well. it just started to just deteriorate me. Because, I am who I am, right. And it was what it was. And, there was a period where in my head, I knew this has a shelf life now, And the other thing about me, the reason, all these things that I've been doing, I always say everything kind of has a shelf life.
Right.
I'm going to be into it, and then at some point I'm going to get interested in something else and less interested in this thing, and my creativity is going to shift over to this other thing. And with that, even with the business, it was a 5 years before, it had to end. Yeah. I knew that it was going to end.
So I would suspect, I'm going to offer up an answer that, and you'll tell me if I'm right or not, that your strength during that 5-year period was your wife, was Kim, who kind of kept it going and
because I was dying.
Right, you were mentally and or spiritually out of it at that point.
Yeah.
Right, so that was your strength, though. You had the right partner.
There you go.
Right,
you go.
So, which sometimes is the key to business.
Amen.
That's the key to my business today is having the right partners.
Yeah.
So, which took me many, many years to figure out, but. So that's a strength.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a creative person, and so that's great at a certain level. But nuts and bolts and business, even my businesses now. She's more the.
I know she's more than like the nuts and bolts, the financial, the administrative, and all that, right?
And I'm out there just creating songs and creating. But you
were a great pair. You were great partners. So that besides being married, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's great. All right, so let's get to Hipsetter. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of background so we can save some time on that because this was from our meeting. But Malcolm invented the Hipsetter device to address posture issues and injuries, with a focus on rehabilitation after hip replacement surgery. So I full disclosure, I've had hip replacement surgery, and I was one of his pilots, pilot cases. The product development involved several years of refinement, learning biomechanics, and understanding different user needs. This shows you the Renaissance man that he is. He saw the need, and he digs into it, and he learns and became an expert on something that you probably didn't have that much. You didn't have that much knowledge about.
Zero.
Well, you had a little bit from being an athlete, intuitively, I think, but maybe not. But you really had never studied it or anything.
Yeah. It was something that I saw as a coach. As a coach, I was at Cornell at the time, and I saw that our athletes would come in for practice, and they always were in a bad body position. And with sprinting and track and hurdles, posture is everything, And so we were always struggling with, why do, we can get them into a good place, but then tomorrow they come in, they're in a bad place again. And so I started just looking at posture in that way, but I was looking at it in a very mechanical way, like, okay, we want the pelvis to be here and it's never here. So what can I do to create something that'll get it there really fast so we can get on with our lives and practice or whatever. In doing that, now that was probably a couple years of trying stuff that didn't work, but eventually I had an idea that, once I put together a prototype and tried it on myself, it literally made me understand that I wasn't even pursuing the right question. Right. And, it went from there. It went from, I invented it for, high level athletes. I quickly realized the problem isn't really athletes. The problem is our gait in general. And this affects everybody. So then the audience broadened. And, from there, I've just worked with, zeroing in on.
And by the way, it's not just hips either, because the hip bone's connected to the,
everything is connected.
Everything's connected.
Everything is connected to everything, but
so
the
it's
pelvis.
Backs and it's
but the pelvis is the center of everything, and where it's located in space affects everything. And that's really what it amounts to.
You look at the skeleton; it's like the keystone almost of the body.
Keystone. Now, most conventional. Biomechanics or whatever, they're looking at the pelvis and saying, okay, the sacrum is the keystone. And what I realized was that, it was actually on the opposite side of the body. So that was one of the challenges when I first invented the product, is that, it's fixing your posture. That's one of the things it's doing, but it's actually doing a lot more than that. But it's fixing your posture so that you can have a better gait. Right. But if I say, hey, I got this posture device, then 99.9% of people are going to think, yeah, I'll put it on my back and it brings my shoulders back and it makes me stand up straighter, blah, blah, blah.
Or a lot of people think, I have good posture. I don't need
or they think
that.
they got good posture. Yeah. But, the device itself, when you see it, it's completely not that, right? So that was probably my biggest initial struggle, was just like people already believing that they understood what posture was.
Right.
They either thought they had it or that, they knew how to get it, or what something should look like that gave it to them.
Now, believe it or not, we only have like 2 minutes left, which is time flies on the show. I know that was your original challenge. Now your challenge has become, because we talked about it, as marketing, like getting the word out.
Yeah.
So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So marketing to different constituencies, as I realized, okay, who really can get the most out of this? There's, runners. That's where I started. And then there's just everybody that walks, which is everybody else. Right. But now what I'm really realizing is that, in terms of recovery, there's a whole market of people that are going through different knee surgery, hip surgery, or, things that out of that, they need they would be benefited by learning to walk better than they were before. And so that's where my focus is now, and will be for, the foreseeable future, is really like getting
the word out.
Getting the word out and talking to that constituency.
With the 5 things I want to ask you. We have very little time, but so I know you're working on that, and I know you're thinking about, you look at rehab centers and physical therapists and maybe orthopedic surgeons and stuff like that. What is I'll just ask you this real quickly. If I asked you your vision for 3 years from now, this is now September of 2028, and you and I are talking, what would have to happen over that 3-year period for you to feel like that was a successful period in your business? We have like 20 seconds.
So the end result is that I want the Hipsetter to be institutionalized as part of the recovery process for anybody that needs to learn how to walk.
That's
better.
wonderful. And you can find the Hipsetter for people listening at, what's the website real quick?
Learn.hipsetterwpc.com.
Wonderful. Malcolm, thanks for being here today. Thank all of you for listening. See you next week on Founders Forum, and have a great day.
Awesome.
We hope you enjoyed your time with Founders Forum and that you found value to take with you throughout your day. Join us again next week for another episode of Founders Forum on WXKB 1039 HD2.